Right, what is up, you guys, and welcome to episode 5 of Business Foundations in a Changing World. In this episode, we're going to be going over chapter 5. We're going to be talking about small businesses, entrepreneurship, and franchising. And I'm pretty sure most of you guys have heard the word entrepreneur before. So, entrepreneur is someone that wants to create and manage a business to achieve his desired objective, whether that's financial independence, whether, he's someone that wants to start a family business so that he can pass it on to his children later on. All of these are desired objectives. But people mostly want to be entrepreneurs because they want to make money. Okay? So entrepreneurship movement is accelerating and many new small businesses are emerging. And personal opinion, I think that this is because of technology. Technology has made it so much easier to start online businesses and, find your niche, if you will. So entrepreneurship has definitely grown in the past, I'd say 10 years because of technology and the internet. Again, technology is now easier to obtain by a small business. Things like websites, podcasts, online videos, social media, obviously, phones, drop shipping. All of these are new ways that you can be an entrepreneur and start your own small business. Growing trend among small businesses is social entrepreneurship. Okay, so this trend has been growing for a while now, and that is social entrepreneurship between small businesses. Social entrepreneurs are basically people who use entrepreneurship to address social problems. So think of it as Uber, for example. We always had the problem of having to stop taxis and having, to pay them in cash and stuff like that. Well, I mean, when Uber came in, they basically fixed a big social problem. Okay. Again, ordering food, Uber Eats as well, another great example. You can now order food while sitting on your couch instead of having to go to the restaurant. Again, solving a social problem. Okay, so what is a small business? It's pretty self-explanatory. Any independently owned and operated business that is not dominated in its competitive area. So a business that is independent, right, and is not dominant in the competitive area is called a small area. Now, small business, the word small is relative, and it's basically a business that employs less than 500 people. Let's go to SBA, or Small Business Administration. This is basically an independent agency of the federal government that gives financial and managerial assistance to small businesses because, small businesses don't have a lot of capital, so it might be quite hard to get financial and managerial assistance. Okay. Women and minority-owned businesses. So women-owned businesses are responsible for, this is basically just facts, responsible for employing millions of workers, and women own more than 9 million businesses nationwide. Nothing new here. Minority-owned businesses are businesses that are at least 51% owned and operated by normal citizens instead of the government. Okay? And they represent 28.6% of all small businesses. Okay, so let's move on to something called innovation. Okay, so innovation in general, let's talk about innovation and small businesses. So small firms produce more than half of all innovations, believe it or not. Small firms make up approximately 2% of franchises, and we'll talk about franchising in a second here. Many of today's largest businesses started off as small firms that used innovation to achieve success. And we have an example here, Etsy. Basically, it's an e-commerce site that sells homemade and vintage items. And basically, what happened is this small firm became publicly traded in 2015 and is now valued at over $3 billion. Okay, entrepreneurs provide fresh ideas and usually have greater flexibility to change than large firms. Okay, so when we're talking about corporations and large firms, it's quite hard to change the direction or to convince someone to change, ideas and flexibility of the business itself. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur and you have a small business, things are a lot easier to, change. It's a lot easier to change directions, if you will. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, now let's look at small business ownership, some of the advantages and disadvantages. Again, independence, you work on your own. You don't have to listen to someone else as an entrepreneur. Costs, things shouldn't be too high. Flexibility, like we said. Focus, you're focused. You don't have anyone else to cause problems. And reputation. Small businesses typically have better reputation because small businesses tend to focus a lot more on customers, believe it or not. Sometimes corporations, because there's so many people, a lot of things tend to go wrong when it comes to reputation. Disadvantages, again, high stress level. You're going to be operating a lot more. You're going to be putting in a lot more hours than your normal 9 to 5 in a corporation. So that's high stress, high failure rate. Again, you're a small business and you're not really the one dominating the competitive field. So it's quite high that you might fail. Under capitalization, again, you're not going to have enough funding. So unless you have your own money as an entrepreneur, it's quite hard to get money to keep the business and to start and to keep the business operating. Managerial, sorry, I can't say it. Managerial inexperience or incompetence. Again, you as an entrepreneur, or even if you hire someone, you don't really have the experience for the whole thing unless you've done it before. And inability to cope with growth. Now, a lot of people don't think that this is a disadvantage, but I disagree. Some people don't know what to do when business is booming, if you will. They overuse the resources and end up going broke later on, or they put too little and try to save more money, and in the end, again, the business fails. Let's move on. Successful traits of young entrepreneurs. Again, these are some traits that we've seen with young entrepreneurs in the past years. We have intuitive, which basically means using your intuition to find out, or if you will, what's true without reasoning. Basically means following your heart, if that makes sense. Again, productivity, a big one. Being productive, being able to produce large amounts of something during a specific time period. So finishing as much work as possible, going over so much stuff in your business in a specific time period. Again, being resourceful, understanding how to use and spend resources wisely. This is very important. A lot of people overuse or underuse resources. So again, resourceful, very important. Understanding how to use and spend your resources wisely is very important. If you don't use enough resources, you risk failing. If you overuse, then you risk spending a lot more money. Okay. Charismatic, obviously having the ability to inspire others behind a central vision is very important for having employees that actually do their jobs and just not, dread going to their 9 to 5. Innovative, being able to come up with new and creative ideas, always staying fresh. And this helps with technology, obviously, as the world is progressing much faster than it did like 20, 30 years ago. So being innovative on the spot is obviously a huge plus nowadays. Risk taker, having the ability to pursue risky endeavors despite the possibility of failure. Again, this is not everybody. Not everybody's going to be a risk taker, but for those that do, although the possibility of failure is quite high, when you do get that high reward, it feels so good, so they keep going. Persistent, continuing in a certain action in spite of obstacles. Again, there's a difference between being persistent and doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So persistent is, let's say, for example, I'm just going to give you a simple example here. Like I started my own business and I failed, right? So what I should do, and what is meant by persistent here, is you take a look at what you did wrong and improve on that instead of doing the whole thing over again and doing the same mistakes and expecting a different outcome. Okay? And finally, we have the last trait, which is friendly. Again, this one's a no-brainer. Being able to have mutually beneficial interactions with people. Basically, not being, not being someone that's bad to be around, if you will. Being friendly with people, smiling, having good interactions with humans is always a successful trait. Okay, now let's take a look at advantages of independence. So obviously, independence means you doing your own thing, away from your employer, or simply by having no job and being an entrepreneur. This is the meaning of independence. You being your own boss, if you will. So to do better for themselves than they could by remaining with their current employer or by changing jobs. To choose whom they work with, the flexibility of where and when to work, and the option to work in a family setting. This basically is the meaning of independence, okay? Your ability to, or not your ability, your freedom to choose when, where, how, and why, okay, when it comes to business. That is independence. Excuse me. Advantages of costs. So for costs, you can spend less money on wages, salaries, rent, utilities, etc. when it comes to a small business. You could also use external firms to handle accounting, advertising, and legal counseling instead of having to hire people to do those things. Again, this one's not, you could do that, but I don't know if a lot of people do this or not, which is friends and family volunteer time to work on certain projects inside the business. Advantages of flexibility, focus, and reputation. Again, flexibility. This small size allows flexibility in the business itself. So, like we said, being flexible in a small business is much easier than being in a whole, big company. Okay, because you're a lot more flexible to meet market demands. Usually, one layer of management, the owner in this case, makes the decisions and is executed quite quickly. Focus efforts on a precisely defined market niche, a specific group of customers. Again, focus is much easier in a small business. Reputation, because of capacity to focus on narrow niches, you develop better reputation for your quality and for your service. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the disadvantages. We have high stress level, so likely to provide a living for its owner, but not much more. So if you're planning on starting a small business, you have to understand that you're not going to be rich right away, if at all. So you're probably going to have a living, just like a job, but nothing more. So there's a lot of times where you're going to be sitting there and like, is this even worth it? Okay? Ongoing worries about competition, employee problems, new equipment, expanding inventory, rent increases, or changing market demand. So the thing is, a lot of people think that being an entrepreneur is the new, I'll do my own thing, hey, but with that comes its own set of problems and worries. So when you have a 9 to 5 job, you go do the work that you're asked to do and you go home, nothing more, nothing less. But when you're the owner of the whole thing, there are so many worries that you constantly have to worry about that it's honestly can get really tiring very quickly. So things like competition, again, like we said, equipment falling apart, market demand, rent increases, all of these are things that you as a business owner have to worry about. Small business person is often the owner, manager, sales force, shipping and receiving clerk, bookkeeper, and custodian. Okay. So basically, this can be a huge disadvantage. So a small business person is sometimes the owner, manager, the shipping and receiving clerk, bookkeeper, and custodian. So that means that you, as an owner, you're gonna have to be doing something of some sort inside the business. So you can't just start your own business and be like, hey, you guys do this. I'm just gonna go work my 9 to 5 and go to bed, and my business should bring me money in a couple months. No, you're gonna have to actively be involved with the business, and sometimes even having to work multiple shifts in your business itself. Multitasking can result in long hours for most owners. Again, like we said, you're going to be multitasking a lot of things between your business. Sometimes, if you still want to do a 9 to 5, so you're basically working nonstop as an entrepreneur. Now let's talk about high failure rate. Half of all small businesses fail within 5 years. Again, some of the disadvantages that cause high failure is undercapitalization. Some people just don't have enough money anymore, right? They lack the funds to operate the business normally. The business suffers and boom, it goes down. Too many entrepreneurs think that all they need is the money to get started. So a lot of small business owners think that, hey, or about to be business owners, they think that, hey, if I can just get like the 20K to start my business, everything will go fine. Little do they know that your business needs constant funds to keep operating, right? And eventually you start getting returns on those funds that you made a long while ago. So yeah, a lot of people think that, hey, I just need those 20K to start my business and I should be fine. But truth is, you need money all the time. Maybe not the same amount, but you need money to keep things rolling. And if you're living, month to month, you're not exactly in a good spot to, have enough funds for your business. Managerial inexperience or incompetence. Okay, so a lot of people think, or a lot of entrepreneurs or social media entrepreneurs, as we all see nowadays, think that just because they have a great idea that'll solve, the next social problem, that, hey, they're going to become the next Uber, right? You see, simply that's not the case. Having a vision and actually acting on it and it to actually work, they're all very different steps. So just because an entrepreneur has a brilliant vision does not mean that he or she has the knowledge or experience to manage. I'm sure a lot of us, even me personally, I don't even know how hard it is to manage, a company like Uber, being the manager on a company like that. Okay? So I might have a great idea, but I simply lack the knowledge and experience to manage said idea, which is a lot of people, something that a lot of people, struggle to admit to themselves. Inability to cope with growth. Growth requires owner to give up some direct authority. So eventually, as you go up as a business owner, your business grows bigger, and sometimes you're gonna have to bring someone else, another owner or investors, people that are gonna start to push you around a little bit, if you will. You're not gonna have all the say in what happens in the business anymore, and some people just can't do that anymore. They like, hey, I'm so used to having authority over who does what and when and why and how that I don't, I'm not comfortable anymore. Okay, so this is called the inability to cope with growth. Now, starting a small business, 2 of 2, here we have 1. This is basically the general idea of how to start a business or a small business, sorry. So you start with a concept or a general idea. That can be anything, whether something like a restaurant or something that you want to fix a social problem or a simple service for money. Okay. 2 is obviously create a business plan. A business is nothing without a plan. 3, devise a strategy for planning and development. Have your own strategy. How often are we going to be planning? How is development going to go and such? And 4, make important decisions. Things like who's going to take ownership. Remember in the previous video we talked about sole proprietorship. Are you going to be the only owner, or are you going to be in a partnership? All of these questions have to be answered before the business starts. Again, financing, a very big problem. Who's going to raise capital for the business? Is it going to be you? Are you going to have investors? All of these questions as well. Acquire existing business or start new. So what you want to do you want to use your money to buy a business, or do you want to start one from scratch, and do you want to buy a franchise? Let's keep going. So the business plan. A precise statement of the business rationale and a step-by-step explanation of how it will achieve its goals. Again, your business plan should not be just something off the top of your head. No, put it down on a piece of paper and write everything in complete detail. Okay? So this gives you a guide and reference document. So when things start going a little bit downhill, or if things are looking good, you're like, hey, oh yeah, we're doing good. Okay, so explanation of the business itself, analysis of competition. What's the competition like in the business area that you want to go in. Again, your income/expense estimates. Establish strategy for acquiring sufficient funds to keep the business going. Again, like we said, if you do not have enough money, if you barely have enough money to start the business, it's probably not a good idea to start said business unless you until you get enough funds to keep it going for at least like a year or so. Revised periodically to ensure the firm's goals and strategies to adapt to changes in the environment. Okay, so as time goes on, things change. Some businesses are no longer useful, so you have to, every once in a while, take a look at the goals and make sure that everything is going according to plan and how the world is moving. Let's take a look at forms of business ownership. Again, we talked about this in the previous video. We have sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. After developing a business plan, the entrepreneur has to decide on an appropriate legal form of business ownership. Do you want to be on your own? Sole proprietorship is the way to go. Do you want to be with 2 or 3 or 4 partners? Partnership. And if you're going to start a whole corporation, then hey, start bringing investors in and everybody in. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the financial resources. Like we talked about not having enough funds, maybe having, but if you don't exactly have money, how do you get enough funds? So often the small business owner has to put up a significant percentage of the necessary capital. So let's say I need 20K to start my own restaurant. This is just off the top of my head here. So me as, the entrepreneur that I am, or the business owner that I want to be, I'm going to have to put at least, I would say, like 17, 18K into the business itself. How do I do that? I could use that with cash money or by obtaining capital. Now, I have 2 different options for obtaining capital if I do not have said money. I could use something called debt financing and equity financing, and we'll talk about those more in a second here. So small business owners often use debt financing from banks or the Small Business Administration to start their own organization. So a lot of people do something which I'm not really the biggest fan of, but I guess everybody has their own way of starting a business. I do not like getting in debt to start your own business. And actually, let me go over debt financing in a bit before I start equity financing. So new businesses sometimes borrow more than half of their financial resources. So for example, like we said, let's take that same example. I'll go to a bank. I'm like, hey, I want to start a restaurant. Bank's like, okay, cool. How much money do you need? And I'm like, I need 10K, right? Remember when I said it was 20K? That means I have 10K and the bank's going to give me 10K. The problem with this is if the business fails, now I owe the money, now I owe the bank 10K that I do not have. You see how this can go wrong very quickly, especially when you add more and more money that you as an entrepreneur do not have yet. So it's a high risk that I'm personally not the biggest fan of. A lot of people can do it. I personally would not ever do this. Banks are the main suppliers of external financing. Federal level, the Small Business Administration, or also called as SBA, offers financial assistance to qualifying business. Or you could simply look to family and friends as sources for long-term loans or other assets for an ownership interest in the business. Okay, so again, personally, I would say that friends and family is much, like if you take money from them, it's a much better alternative than banks, because banks can be ruthless. But with friends and family, you could give them an ownership, a part of the company, if you will, or part of the restaurant. You could also work something out with them. You don't have to exactly pay them, or else your credit goes to absolute hell. Okay, let's take a look at equity financing. Referred to as equity financing because the owner uses real personal assets rather than borrowing funds from outside sources to get started in a new business. So let's say you have real estate, right? You have a building, right? And you have tenants living. So if you use that money to start your own business, then this is called equity financing. You can also obtain equity financing by finding investors for their operations and selling stock in the business to family members, friends, employees, or other investors. So you could either use your own assets as an entrepreneur to have enough funds for your new business, or you could put it on the stock market and obviously for investors to invest in your business. Okay. Starting from scratch versus buying an existing business. Okay, so starting from scratch can be expensive and requires promotional efforts to familiarize customers with the business itself. So if you're starting a business from scratch, you're gonna have to, have promotions, or promotional efforts for the customers to get to know who you are as a company or as a business itself. But if you buy a business, an existing business, you have the advantage of a built-in network of customers. You have customers that already know who you are. You have suppliers and distributors. You don't have to go through all of that as you would with a business that is starting from scratch. This reduces some of the guesswork inherent in starting a new business. And obviously, this one's a no-brainer. But if you as an entrepreneur decide to buy a business, an existing business, that means that you get all the problems that are within the business in the current time. So if there are any problems with the existing business, obviously you'd already know about them, but you're now responsible for all of them. Now let's talk about franchising. So franchise is basically a license to sell another's products or to use another's name in business, or simply both. Okay, so it's a license to sell another's products or to use another's name in business, or both. We have the franchisor, that is the company that sells a franchise. So the company that sells a franchise is called franchisor, and franchisee is the purchaser of a franchise. Okay, so this is the one that sells, this is the one that buys. Okay, and this is the license itself. Okay, let's take a look at advantages of franchises. Again, with franchising, you can get training and support, brand name appeal, standardized quality of goods and services, national and local advertising depending on obviously the business. Having buying rights to a company like Apple, for example, gives you great local and national advertising, as well as worldwide as well. Financial assistance, proven products and format. Obviously, no one is going to question, how Samsung phones work, for example, because they've been proven to be very good, instead of, buying third-party phones and such. Centralized buying power, site selection, and territorial protection, and greater chance for success, all because of a logo or a name. You see how insane that is? Okay, let's take a look at some of the disadvantages of franchises. So when I say franchises, you guys remember, it's simply a license to use a logo or a name. Disadvantages, again, fees and profit sharing. If you're gonna use someone else's logo or name, you're probably gonna have to split the profits and fees, obviously depending on the percentage that you guys agree on. Standardized operations, restrictions on purchasing. You're not the only one calling the shots anymore. Limited product line, possible market saturation. market becomes a lot more and less freedom in decisions, like we said. So this was episode 5, you guys. Let me know in the comments below if you liked it or not. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.